Good day, everyone. Today we will discuss about socioeconomic impact analysis. Framework for socioeconomic impact analysis. This lesson proposes a framework of analysis anchored on the flow of its productive and distributive activities. These activities involve commercial transactions between the firms and its suppliers and buyers. Thus, when a firm purchases inputs from its sellers, there are benefits as well as costs absorbed by the sellers. Similarly, when a firm sells its products to its customers, there are also positive as well as negative consequences that buyers have to realize. Look and understand the picture. Then read the explanation of that picture. Let's move to tracing the impacts through the sourcing of inputs of a business firm. A firm will need two main categories of inputs in its production process: intermediate inputs and factor inputs. Intermediate inputs or raw materials can be unprocessed primary products or semi-processed materials that need further processing or transformation by the firm. Factor inputs, on the other hand, are the processing inputs. The major transforming inputs include labor, management, capital, land, and technology. The impact of the production operation of the firm on the suppliers of its intermediate inputs will depend on the source of raw materials, types of suppliers, stage of product transformation, and market power of firms. Read and understand internal versus external sources and independent suppliers versus subsidiary of the conglomerate. Read and understand raw versus semi-processed inputs and market power of the firm. Let's move to the impact on the factor inputs. Read and understand sourcing for labor services, and within the community versus outside the community as the impacts of factor inputs. Read and understand direct employment versus subcontracting, minimum wage versus market rate, and organized versus non-organized as impacts of factor inputs. Read and understand human resource development and temporal and spatial working conditions as impacts of factor inputs. The impact of a firm's acquisition of funds on the financial market and the owners of the capital will depend on where the funds are raised, manner on how the foreign funds are raised, and the rate of return. Please read and understand own savings versus capital market and foreign borrowing versus foreign direct investment. Please read market-determined versus regulated rates of return. Sourcing for land inputs. Beyond an office space, there are commercial operations that will require vast tracts of land. Please read land intensity of business and location of business and opportunity costs of land use. The impact of the firm on the hiring of its officers, managers, and supervisors will depend on the manner of recruitment and training of these highly skilled professionals. Read and understand insiders versus outsiders and in-house versus outsourced training. Let's move to tracing the impacts through the distribution of outputs of a firm. In this section, we will channel our discussion on the disposition of the output produced by the business establishment. The output can be sold to other industries as intermediate inputs for further processing. Meanwhile, a portion of the output is sold domestically as final outputs to the local customers, investors, and government agencies. Intermediate and final is sold in the global market as exports. Viability of a business enterprise. The higher the profit, the more viable the business venture becomes. The higher profitability in turn attracts other businessmen to undertake the commercial venture. The table in the next slide provides us a guide and a checklist in identifying direct and indirect impacts as well as the positive and negative effects arising from the productive and distributive activities of a firm. A business enterprise with enormous net positive impacts is viable not only because it is profitable, but because its stakeholders tend to benefit from its commercial operations. Lastly, recommendations on managing the impacts of a business enterprise. In the light of the positive and negative direct and indirect effects arising from the productive and distributive activities of a firm, there is a need to enhance its positive contributions and dampen its negative consequences. The next slide will provide recommendations to make the net socio-economic impact of the firm maximized. Number 1. There's a need to improve the productivity of firms' workers. Number 2. As much as possible, business enterprises source their raw materials, labor, and capital inputs from the community where they operate. 3. Use environment-friendly alternatives in the production process and distribution procedures. Number 4. Be socially responsible as commercial enterprises. Number 5. Participate in the production of intermediate goods within the country. 6. Enhance the productivity of the services sector. And number 7, carry out measures to protect consumers.